Welcome to What's the Purpose of It, the podcast where we challenge the current work paradigm and explore how to shift from competition to regeneration, from stress to purpose. Let's rethink work together.
Writing these letters to strangers that helped me start to discover that maybe I did have a voice and that the things that I was most afraid of, that, I would be better off for everybody if I wasn't part of this world anymore. It's so interesting because Gen Z comes into the workforce at a point where a lot of older, bigger companies are still using perhaps kind of outdated bureaucratic management systems, whereas we grew up as digital natives. And a lot of the big company values of profit at all costs no longer resonates the same way as it did before, because we see the toll that it takes on other communities, on the environment, etc. I always say that my biggest fear with social media and how much it has allowed Gen Z to understand mental health is that it allows us to understand it in a bubble. It trendifies mental illness and turns it into buzzwords that make it go viral, make it digestible.
There's this voice in my head that kept on telling me for the past 30 years that if I stop, I will die.
If you can't make progress offline, at least you can fake progress online. And this question of, well, maybe instead of asking what's so wrong with the kids today, we should be asking what's so wrong with the world that the kids don't really see a future with them in it.
Diana Chao is here today with us. She is the founder of Letter to Strangers. I don't know about all of you listening out here, but I haven't written a letter in such a long time. But Diana somehow did it, that more than 500,000 people wrote letters in the past how many years?
11.
In the past 11 years. So how can a Gen Zer, and why would a Gen Zer mobilize more than 500,000 people to write letters to strangers?
That's such a great opening question, and thank you for having me on this podcast. I think, honestly, it's less about getting people to write letters and more about giving people an outlet to voice, whether that be frustrations or loneliness or stories that they've been holding up within themselves for so long. It's very common that, we'll get someone telling us, hey, I've never handwritten a letter before. Is this okay? And we're just say it's okay, because think about it like how people recommend others to journal. Right? Like for me, I started writing letters to strangers because of that recommendation. And I've found out that journaling was fantastic for many people, but in that particular moment in time, I was not in a healthy enough space to be able to journal without spiraling too much. And so that was when having an audience, a stranger on the other side, in a letter format, helped me organize my thoughts better, helped me find my own voice. And that is really what it's all about, and seems to have resonated with all those people over the years.
I love it. But how did it started? Like, what made you go through that?
Yeah, so when I was 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder too, and then later on in my life, complex PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Around that time, it's a scary diagnosis, especially about a decade ago. But I think the other part of it that was difficult was I was facing a lot of cultural, linguistic, and financial barriers. I was a first generation immigrant to the US. I was born and grew up in a village in the poorest province of China as an ethnic minority. So there were a lot of difficulties where, my parents didn't speak English. Mental health, mental illness, what the heck was that? Nobody gave a crap. So it was writing these letters to strangers that helped me start to discover that maybe I did have a voice and that the things that I was most afraid of, that, I would be better off for everybody if I wasn't part of this world anymore. I started to question that because I found that I actually quite enjoy talking to people through these letters. I enjoyed finding out what I thought in a way that didn't feel like I was just going to spiral down and down and down. So yeah, that's really how I started. And then I turned it into a student club at my high school, and then it just somehow grew from there.
I absolutely love it. Well, full disclosure for everyone listening here, I discovered you at Davos when you were in a panel talking about mental health for youth.
Yes.
And I felt in love with everything you just said there. It just felt so appropriate and so on this world, not out of this world, as it may seem for a lot of people. And I'm wondering, I'm an advocate for mental health in Romania, especially in the workplace. Mental health is all over the place. We need it in every area of our life, but I'm mostly focused in the workplace. And I'm wondering, how is, in your opinion, the mental health of my generation and your parents' generation affecting the mental health of the next generation?
Yeah, no, this is such an important question. So there was this study, a series of studies actually done a few years ago, where they took a bunch of mice and then they put some of the mouse in trauma-inducing, anxiety-inducing situations, and then the other mice were left as quote unquote normal. And they mated the two mice together, and then every subsequent generation of mice were mated with only normal, non-trauma induced mice. And yet, both the behavioral and molecular level changes of the anxiety and trauma-induced mice lasted up to 5 generations later. So I always like to bring this example up because, of course, like we are not mice, but the key point remains the same that the phrase hurt people comes from reality. And I think that's the key thing that I had to learn as well, wherein when we have conversations with people who are our seniors, whether that's in the workplace or in our family, it's very easy to fall into pitfalls where the conversation doesn't go anywhere because one side thinks, well, you've never experienced what I've gone through, so how could you possibly, be complaining? Not understanding or not realizing that it is precisely because they went through so many difficult things that impacted the way that they raised or interact with everyone around them. And that's why we have to heal together. So I always like to say there's a follow-up to the phrase hurt people, hurt people. And my version of that is healed people, heal people.
I love this perspective. That's very nice. And it raises too many questions. I'm just going to have to choose from my head because it's like really crowded right now. When you said heal people, um, what do we do when the previous generations that really didn't have much access to this kind of conversations are perhaps not ready to enter into this space of and this conversation? Do we condition the mental well-being of our next generation only if they started, or should we start no matter what?
I definitely would be on the side of let's start the conversation no matter what, because ultimately it affects us regardless of who is willing to talk about it. But I think it's also important to, give ourselves some autonomy and some accountability in the process as well. Like, of course, intergenerational trauma plays a huge role, but it's not the only thing that plays a role. And it means that we are not powerless. I used to feel a lot of anger because, a large reason of my PTSD was because of my father. And I used to be so angry, thinking, why is it fair for me to have to be the one to break the chains of generational pain and trauma when I'm just a kid? This shouldn't be up to me, and I don't want to bear that burden. It's too hard to forgive, to forget, etc. But I realized over time that, you know, if I am in a position in my life where I am able to even recognize that there are these chains of pain going through generations to begin with, that I can take a step back and see it in that lens, I am already starting that process of breaking the chains because I'm noticing that they're there. And the other part of it is recognizing that it's not really about putting fault on me or my family or the people around us, but rather about how do we heal together. And I think taking that together approach helps open up the conversation for a lot of those people because the reason they might initially be afraid to start the conversation is because they're afraid that they're going to get the blame. And people are, of course, defensive when they feel like they have to be. So going in with that openness, that empathy, that let's do this together approach oftentimes can be the change that is needed.
I love this perspective. And that brings me a step further in our conversation. I got this whole list of questions I have for you. And when I wrote them, I really thought as a millennial trying to pick brains on a Gen Zer. Because I often see in the market, in the labor market, and mostly because, as I said, that's where I'm kind of hoovering around. I often see this battle between millennials and Gen Zer, and employers being very unhappy with the Gen Z attitude, mindset, whatever that is. And I'm wondering, how do things look from the other side? Because most of the people that are in your initiatives are Gen Zers, so you are very close to them. What is Gen Z in search of when it comes to work, to living, to relationships? What are the most common mental health challenges Gen Z has? Because in our mind, the millennials that had been abused, emotionally neglected, gaslighted all the time, it's like, oh, guys, but you're having such an easy time. We didn't hit you. We broke the cycle. We worked hard so you can have an iPhone. Why are you complaining? Did I make it right? I begged.
That was such a good impression.
And I'm out.
You know, I think so. I'm going to be making a little bit of a generalization here, bearing in mind that, a sizable portion of the people we work with come from communities where, there's not consistent access to internet, to electricity, things like that, to water. So this is a little bit of a generalization, but it is true for the most part that Gen Z is far more comfortable with online narratives and just social media and that sort of digital presence than the generations before us. And part of that has been opening up the conversation more about, mental health, right? You see these things trending on TikTok, you start to talk about it more. And I think that is partially what causes this divide where it feels like, oh, this kid saw something on TikTok and now they think they have XYZ disorder. Well, if they only knew what I had to go through, and I really do empathize with that. But I think it's an artificial divide in the sense that it's something that is hurting both sides in different ways. And I always say that my biggest fear with social media and how much it has allowed Gen Z to understand mental health is that it allows us to understand it in a bubble. It trendifies mental illness. And turns it into buzzwords that make it go viral, make it digestible, and it loses out on a lot of the nuance of what makes mental health so difficult. And so when we have these conversations and we feel like there is this divide, I think it's less that, oh, one person has it harder and one person doesn't, but more that faced with similar types of mental anguish, whether or not it's caused by the same level of physical or financial or whatever else stress, faced with similar mental anguish, our resources and default responses become different. And I would say that if a Gen Z person's default response is to turn on the camera and then record themselves crying, that is probably not as helpful just in a different way than how a millennial might be or another older person might be keeping it inside. So I would hope that we would cross that bridge together and just have those honest conversations in person and give each other a hug. And yeah, not have this artificial bridge that feels very real, but actually doesn't have to be.
Well, I'm going to keep on playing devil's advocate here. I'm sorry, it's just my job now.
Of course.
And I'm going to look at another thing that I see a lot of people from my generation or previous generation being very worried and expressing a lot, the fact that Gen Zers and the generations that are following them are very committed to, I don't know, their phones, their devices, they're on YouTube all day, they're addicts. And I have my own peace of mind here that these kids did not find an addiction because they were too well. They found it because they needed a place to vent. But I'm very curious how it feels from your generation. Why so much social media? Why so much device? Why living in the world inside of the digital space? but not in the one in the outfit. But maybe that's how we perceive it. Maybe you think of it a little bit different. So I'm very curious on your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I said at the panel that you saw me at was this feeling of like if you can't make progress offline, at least you can fake progress online. And this question of, well, maybe instead of asking what's so wrong with the kids today, we should be asking what's so wrong with the world that the kids don't really see a future with them in it. And it's a tough thing because I do think the way that algorithms work do feed into negativity in a way that amplifies and exaggerates, perhaps at times, some of the difficulties of the world, and that's not healthy for a young person or anybody. But I think ultimately the the social media and technology, we've opened up the Pandora's box. I don't think that's ever really going to go away. So if that is what the reality is, we have to, I think, talk about the problem in a different way. So I often think that the unfortunate reality is the same people who are most vocal against social media and tech usage are the same people who are addicted to their own phones. These parents who can't eat dinner without scrolling through their news feed or going through their YouTube subscriptions, etc. And I think if we made a committed effort as a community to implement more ways to connect in person, which is more difficult to do in today's time and limited opportunities, but nonetheless, it has to be a multilateral, both ways sort of commitment. I think we really can show people that there is that other reality that they can explore outside of their phones, but we have to first experience it ourselves.
I totally agree that leading by example actually implies that we do it first. And hearing you out, like if we cannot make it in the real world, we can at least fake it in the digital one. And that made a lot of sense for me when I heard you at Davos. But now I'm going deeper and I'm thinking, so what are the struggles when it comes to mental health that your generation is facing at the moment? Like specifically, do you like from the people you already said which are yours? And thank you so much for sharing and being open about it. But from what you noticed around you, what are the hardships right now?
There's a few different things. I think really toxic beauty standards that permeate every second of your new online feed that you can't escape just by closing the magazine cover, like in the old days. That is one thing that has caused a lot of concerns with body image. And we've even seen a rise in young people going to plastic surgeons saying, hey, can you make me look like the me with a Snapchat filter on, rather than can you make me look like a celebrity or something else? Now you are becoming the version of you that you wish you could be. And it's an artificial version. But another part of it is it's like, you have a lot of fears, I think, like, and I say you as in like us as a community, I hear this all the time. We have a lot of fears about what the future holds, whether that's economically or from the climate perspective. And it's scary, and it means that sometimes it's easier to just try to hide away from it all, which is a common, feeling across history. But the difference is now the ways to figure out how to hide away from all of those pains and anxieties is different. You can figure it out with a quick 1 second Google search. You can look up and see in your own news feed, in your own social media feed, really dangerous methods that you might not as easily come across before. You can buy from things online that you couldn't access before. And so all of this makes it a lot easier to go down a deeper path, a darker path that we probably all wanted to at some point, but just were not able to, thankfully, to the same ease and extent as we could today.
And if, let's say, we have parents listening to us and they have kids, regardless, they're Gen Zers, Alpha, whatever it's coming up next, what should they be paying attention to spot on early signs of mental health distress?
I think the biggest thing is you have to try to create a safe and communicative space with your child, which is definitely much easier said than done. But my key point is if someone wants to hide their distress from you, they will do their best to hide it and you will not notice. And so if you want to notice it, you have to show them that it's okay for them to feel that way so that they feel like it's okay to come talk to you about these things. And part of that is the whole leading by example thing, right? Like you don't have to have a really deep conversation about mental illness with them, but by talking to them day to day about just emotions and how maybe you are not a superhero, how you're feeling XYZ, but you're going to try to do this or that, and it sometimes helps. And just opening that conversation so that when they do feel that distress, it doesn't feel like such a scary thing that they have to hide from you.
I love this approach, and I can confirm it works. I have two kids, and it works on both of them. And one is 15 as one is 6. So even if it's a huge age gap, it works. But I'm going to switch a bit, and I'm going to go back into the workforce market because Gen Z also needs to make a living.
Yes.
Or do they? I'm
Uh,
wondering, what's the approach on work? Because we've seen my generation hustling, workism all over the way. I think that work was the most accessible drug for my generation. We drugified work and made it accessible. The rush of being validated, of being given a reward, it just made us not stop. And I'm curious, how is work for your generation?
I think part of it is Gen Z mostly grew up having seen during their childhood what it was like for their parents to live through the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, or whatever other difficult circumstances, as we've seen around the world. There's been economic recessions and things like that. And when you grow up with that, which I'm sure a lot of other generations in the past can also relate to, it does make you feel a little bit like, wow, why should I be so loyal to a company? Why should I work so hard when I'm so disposable and anything can drop at a click? And so I think that's really where a lot of it comes from. This feeling of like, well, if I'm not going to be really valued the way that, generations ago were valued in the workforce, why should I put in all that effort? The other part of it is also just a feeling of exhaustion because we see now that like Gen Z's spending power is among the lowest, if not the lowest, across the generations in terms of like what we can buy with the same amount of money. And it's tough. The cost of living, it makes it feel like, okay, well, no matter how hard I work, I'm still not going to have enough. So screw it. I'm not even going to bother to that extent anymore because the gap just feels like it's too big to cross. That's another thing I hear a lot.
Wow. That's put things in a very new perspective. I hope for the people listening to us also. And now I'm going to switch from parents and from how Gen Zers fit in the workplace to the people that are supposed to be handling Gen Zers in the workplace. And we hear, like, when I do trainings in organizations, I hear so much stereotypes and misjudgment regarding how they should motivate this generation. And what do you see as being the hardest challenges Gen Z has when it comes to their managers and fitting into the workplace as it is today?
It's so interesting because Gen Z comes into the workforce at a point where a lot of older, bigger companies are still using perhaps kind of outdated bureaucratic management systems. Whereas we grew up as digital natives, everything was very agile and we're much more of that sort of stereotypical startup-y, sort of like nimble, fast-paced type of thinking type of person. And especially because basically we all had to go to school on Zoom at one point because of the pandemic. We all learned how to multitask kind of to an annoying degree with like online screen usage and things like that. And so it feels very, very conflicting to then suddenly take all of those skill sets and all of that innate knowledge that we've had with technology and then shift it to be used in a way that doesn't feel so natural, in that slower, more bureaucratic sort of way where you have to document things in a particular manner and you have to report to this person and that person.
Old school.
But exactly, yeah, old school. And so I don't think it's that one way is better than the other or one way is worse than the other. It's just so different. And we've never really had, maybe except for during the Industrial Revolution, we never really had such a huge shift in technological progress within just one generation that has allowed this type of disconnect to even take place. And I think it's only going to feel even more apparent with AI. But the thing with AI is it's coming at a time when people are already a little more used to integrating technology into their work in a way that is more nimble than before, especially after the pandemic. So I can see things becoming more easily compatible over the next two generations. But we are at a very unique, I would say, point in history where the managers are the people who grew up in a very, very different type of workplace than the Gen Z. And that's really where the friction comes from.
And what would be some tips and tricks for managers, HR, organizations overall to just help Gen Zers get more used to how it works now and perhaps allowing them the space to come up with new ideas?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to what are your expectations? Because if you are subconsciously even having the expectation that this employee is going to do things in the way that you're used to, then you're probably going to be disappointed because that's most likely going to be very, very hard to reset, our brain programming to work in that specific way. But if the expectation is more, okay, let's try to achieve XYZ together, and there could be different ways we take to achieve that, then I think you have a starting point for a conversation. A major question I get a lot is people complaining. I shouldn't say complaining because I do understand where they come from. Where people worry that, especially with Gen Z, using mental health concerns as an excuse, so to speak, in the workforce, in the workplace. And I've seen this as well sometimes within my own organization. Our whole team is made of Gen Z, and especially because we are a mental health organization, it feels more natural for people to come to us to say, hey, I'm not going to do anything today because I'm having a bad mental health day. And of course, in a traditional big company, that's like, what? You can't just say you're not going to do anything just because you have a bad day. So I completely see that tension. I think part of that is, at a certain point, if there is going to be that friction all the time, sometimes people need to understand that they to understand the hard way that that's not okay. But the other way they could, if it doesn't feel like the person is being malicious and they really are just having a hard time, I think thinking about, okay, well, if we want to achieve XYZ goals together, is there a way we can make a plan to at least do a portion of it by this day? And let's really break it down into smaller tasks together. And it feels a little bit pedantic, I guess, a little bit like time wasting, but I think it's important to really outline the very, very specific objectives with that person so that it feels a little more approachable, a little more manageable. Because a lot of that anxiety that comes from, oh my gosh, I'm having such a bad day, I can't deal with this, is just because everything feels like too much. And when you start to break down the too much into, oh, it's actually small enough that I can do this, I think it's easier to have that conversation.
Well, I would just add up to everything you just said that maybe it's time for all of us, regardless of generation, to just expand our window of tolerance to whatever it is that we're feeling, to be able to sit with our emotions and not get so easily overwhelmed by them. And at the same time, I think whenever a Gen Zer takes a break, because like my daughter, if I look at her, my eldest one, because she lived with an workaholic mom, so what could have she learned other than the fact that work is really toxic and it's not good for you and your family? So every time I give her a task to do something, she always starts with a break. Yeah, I'm going to take a break first and then I'm going to start doing it. And of course, the workaholic in me got so annoyed. Like, how can you start with a break? It's unbelievable. It's just already. But it took me a lot of time to understand that the moment she takes a break and I melt down, it's because there's this part of me that's so freaking jealous that she can stop and I can't. There's this voice in my head that kept on telling me for the past 30 years that if I stop, I will die. So maybe it's time for us to look at the fact that whatever this new generations coming our way are doing, and it's annoying hell out of us, maybe there is a little bit more in that annoyment that we feel. And if we have the capacity of looking inwards, we might actually discover some very nice lessons for us to learn. And we're getting close to the end of our discussion, but I still have a few questions that I think they're very important. Because I see all these companies marketing their vision, not only their commercial vision, but also their employer branding vision. And I don't feel they're very inclusive of the new generation. They just have this narrow view that the world is going to go on as they know it, as they want it. And I also hear in a lot of conferences, a lot of, let's say seniors, I'm going to say seniors when it comes to work, not age. So like professionals that have a lot of experience going on stage and talking on behalf of Gen Z. They want this, they want that. We need to live the world like this for them. And I'm wondering, why are we going into this childism mode and we pretend that you guys are not capable of asking what you want? Why do we do that? Maybe that's not the question you can ask, but you can answer. But you can answer maybe how it feels for you when we talk on your behalf and we pretend to live everything in order for you, when in fact we're kind of messing everything up and giving you a heritage that is probably going to give you more headaches than well-being.
This reminds me, last year when I was at Davos, I was so upset because I went to this one session. It was titled something like Gen Z in the workforce or something like that. And I was like, oh, interesting. And I went and it was a panel of all Gen Xers, probably. Like I don't want to judge based on appearance, but let's just say they were all 40 plus. Um, and at one point, I raised my hand and I was just like, I'm just curious, since this panel is literally called Gen Z in the workforce, how come there's literally no Gen Z here? And one of the panelists looked at me and said, "Well, my wife is Gen Z."
Okay.
And I was all like, "Oh boy, we can dissect that in so many ways, and none of it is good." So. I think that kind of just like it's one example of how it feels at the end of the day, right? But I think we all had at some point felt very dismissed and under-recognized. And I think the thing that's difficult is I'm not saying that the insights people who are more senior might see about the Gen Z in their lives is wrong, but that insight is only from their perspective, right? So you don't necessarily know why the Gen Z is behaving this way. You're only saying that they're behaving this way. And I think the key thing is that why. So for example, we were talking about Gen Zers having this bad rep in the workplace. Well, sometimes it feels like also, besides the things I mentioned before, we're living in a climate crisis. We see a lot of issues rising around the world, politically, economically, etc. And a lot of the big company values of profit at all costs no longer resonates the same way as it did before. Because we see the toll that it takes on other communities, on the environment, etc. And so when that is part of the equation as well, maybe then we don't want to commit as deeply to that company. But if you see just the behavior of that, you're saying, oh, this person is not, a good worker. But if you saw the why of that, then you might actually spur a change in the company that wouldn't just benefit the Gen Z who feel that way, but the generations to come and also the generations that are there that would have a renewed sense of motivation once they feel more aligned with the organization in a way that they just felt like they were not allowed to voice before.
Since you were not that happy with the panel in Davos, let's just imagine that you would have been on the panel. What would have been the two things you would have drawn the alarm ring for the people in the audience when it comes to Gen Z in the workforce?
I think the first thing is, the generation demarcation is an artificial thing that we draw up. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings going through really difficult and also good human things. So rather than constantly talking about, well, this is the issue for them, that is that, which it has its time and place, I think it's more important to recognize that whatever is the trend or social factor affecting Gen Z is also affecting other parts of society, including the older generations, perhaps just in a different way. So I think it's important we don't forget that there are these common threats in society that we're all experiencing and taking an empathetic approach to conversations, starting with that realization. The other thing is really just understanding that, everyone wants to be heard. And that includes the people that we're talking about. So, like, I'm so grateful that you're having me on today. And I'm grateful I can share a little bit of insights from my own community. But at the same time, I know, we're not a monolith and I can only say so much. And so, because each person is so different, I think seeing people as the individual that they are more than anything else really will resonate with people on a much more human and meaningful level than we give it credit for.
Sounds amazing. And I would just add on top of everything you just said that maybe it's time to put in our board members meetings, Gen Zers, and even representatives of next generations. And perhaps we can start making choices for them, with them at the table. Thank you so much, Diana. It's been a pleasure. And we're finishing up, and I would just invite you to give just one, I'm not even going to call it piece of advice because I don't think we're in the advice business, none of the two of us, but maybe more of a recommendation to your generation.
Yeah, well, on a very practical note, I would say Letters to Strangers has a lot of educational and advocacy programs that have grown out beyond our letter writing. So we have the world's first Youth for Youth mental health guidebook. It's completely for free to download online.
We're going to put it in the description.
Yeah, do it. So I think it would be a fantastic resource for not even just Gen Z, but really anyone who wants to understand more about mental health and intersectionalities. And on another note is just know your worth. And especially when it comes to the workforce, when it comes to these integrations of young people into these conversations, we're not tokens. None of us are not, and our voice matters in a very real way. So say your piece. Know that you could be wrong sometimes, but you're also very much right a lot of the time.
That's great. Thank you so much. I hope we're going to get the chance to talk more about all the initiatives you pull out throughout the years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining What's the Purpose of It? Until the next time, keep challenging the rules, rethinking the norm, and building workplaces where purpose leads the way. See you soon.